Welcome to a new edition of the brand called You. Today we have a fascinating young man who's made a career life in coffee, Matt Chitharanjan. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Matt is the founder of Blue Tokai Coffee. I'm sure all of you have heard of Blue Tokai. But before that, he was in the Stern School of Business. He did a degree in finance. Then he worked in a real estate firm. He got interested in pursuing a PhD. He worked for USAID in Jordan. And then he worked with IMFR Small Enterprise Center, where he met his wife, Namrata. And there, interestingly, he lived next to a coffee store called Blue Bottle, which got you interested in coffee. Am I correct so far?
The Blue Bottle was in San Francisco, so not so that was
okay. So in San Francisco,
yeah.
Blue Bottle Coffee Store, which is presumably where you got your inspiration of blue from Blue Tokai, is it?
We needed a color to go along with the
Okay.
peacock.
So, Matt, tell us a little bit about your earlier career before you became an entrepreneur.
So I'm from the US. I was born and brought up there. My father, he's Indian from Chennai.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started my career working in economic and real estate consulting in the Bay Area. I spent a number of years doing that and then transitioned to do real estate investing through a hedge fund there. After doing that for some time, I felt academic calling. So I thought I wanted to do a PhD. Both of my parents are actually professors.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to UBC in Canada. Very quickly, I realized that academia is not for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I finished with a master's, but it was there that I became interested in economic development projects. So after graduating, I moved to Jordan to do a project there. I came back to the US and worked for an NGO for a year and a half. And then there was an opportunity to come to India to work for IFMR,
Mm-hmm.
doing research, but more on the ground, coordinating research projects. Because of my Indian roots and having visited off and on growing up, I thought it would be an interesting opportunity to come and work here.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I would come for a year, and it ended up being much longer.
That's
than that.
longer. That's amazing. And you mentioned that you used to enjoy brewing beer as a hobby.
Yeah.
From brewing beer as a hobby to coffee, quite a change.
Yeah, I really wanted to do something with my hands, so that's how brewing beer came about.
Uh-huh.
Actually, before we started Blue Tokai, we had considered trying to do something with a microbrewery, but unfortunately, the capex involved and also the licensing is very difficult. So that's how we ended up deciding on coffee.
So we have a guest coming in a few weeks' time. He has moved to doing beer.
Okay.
Got a brand called the Beer Cafe.
Yeah.
So he's going to be coming.
Oh, nice.
So tell us about the name of the origin of the name Blue Tokai.
So Tokai is an old Malabar word for the plume of the peacock.
Uh-huh.
And so from the very beginning, we knew that we were going to highlight Indian coffee. So we wanted a brand and brand identity that reflected the origins of the beans. And so if you go to any of these coffee estates, you'll often see peacocks flying up throughout the estate.
Mm-hmm.
Peacock is also the national bird of the country.
Yeah.
So that's how the brand came about.
Right. So it actually means blue peacock. Or
The
just
tail.
plume.
So it sounds like it sounds good together, and
Yeah.
the logo is a peacock. So
Wonderful. I've often wondered, coffee, and to me, coffee is coffee. But as I read more, so what is premium coffee?
So premium coffee is coffee that there's 3 steps: sourcing, roasting, and brewing. So premium coffee means that in each of those 3 steps, you focus on the quality. So you source from high quality farms. You pay very careful attention to how you roast the coffee, and then also how you brew the coffee.
And what is your process of sourcing?
So we do direct trade. So we work with farms that were typically exporting coffee. So for a long time, India has been known as kind of a low-cost, low-quality producer of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
But there are actually estates within the country that are producing very high-quality beans.
Okay.
So we've gone and visited and made relationships directly with those farms and buy their export quality coffee.
And I presume that there is something which is called raw coffee, and then it is
Yeah, so
in bean form, and then
coffee is actually a fruit.
Correct.
So it's a berry,
Yeah.
and so actually the seed is what gets harvested. The berries get picked, the seeds are removed from the berries. Then there's another process that goes around to remove an outer skin, and then that's raw green coffee.
And that's what you buy.
And that's what we buy.
Okay. So, it's interesting, since you have Indian origin, your dad is an Indian. India has always been a nation of tea drinkers, except probably in South India.
Yeah.
What has changed every millennial now, starting his or her day with a glass of coffee?
Yeah, coffee has become a little bit trendy.
Yeah.
Tea is sort of what you have at home, but when you want to go out, you don't want to go out for a cup of tea. You want to indulge or treat yourself, and so they're increasingly opting for coffee. It's sort of a transition that happens in a lot of places as places become richer, that coffee becomes more popular.
Because I often hear this term that, I need my morning coffee fix.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking, I've also grown up much older than you, but coffee was never a part of my daily morning routine.
Right.
And yet, every individual I see today, I used to see it when Starbucks started in the US, but now I see every young Indian carrying a cup of coffee to work. Something is changing, right?
Yeah. I mean, so there is some sort of ritualistic aspect of it, but at the same time, coffee also has a significant amount of caffeine, and caffeine gives you that kick to get you started in the morning. It's also addictive, so it's sort of a legal drug that sort of wakes you up and gets you going.
Correct. So, we have seen a big transition. I mean, if I look at it, when I was growing up, it was Nestle, and then came Brew, and then the first parlor was Barista, right? And then, of course, there was Cafe Coffee Day, and there was some also, and then now Starbucks has come, and now you have come in Blue Tokai. What does a customer look for when he or she is making a choice on which coffee to buy?
So I think it's quality mixed with convenience.
Right.
So with instant coffee, the quality is not very high, but it's incredibly convenient. You don't need any equipment. You just mix the powder in with the water and drink that instantly. Once people start tasting what non-instant coffee tastes like, then they get used to that level of quality and that flavor. So CCD then took over that market, and it was very convenient also because they were everywhere. You could get a cup of CCD all across the country. The quality then they lost out a little bit to Costa, then to Starbucks, and now with Starbucks they've sort of elevated the experience of being in a cafe. The furnishings are very nice, the locations are very premium, their staff are very well trained. But for a true coffee connoisseur, the coffee that they serve there is quite dark, so you're not able to taste the complexity and flavor that you can get. And so those are the customers then that are sort of migrating as people learn more about coffee towards our brand.
And how does this compare to the traditional home brewed coffee in a South Indian home?
Filter coffee. So actually, filter coffee now has become mixed with chicory. So chicory is actually a coffee substitute. It came about in the 1800s when coffee prices were too high. So people started mixing chicory in to sort of replicate the taste of coffee.
Well, what is chicory?
Chicory is it's a root of a lettuce, endive. So you harvest the root and you roast it and process it, and then it has a coffee-like flavor. But now it's been so entrenched in South Indian coffee culture that people feel that you need to add chicory to get the true taste of coffee.
I see.
So it's interesting that sort of an additive has now become a replacement for the
So when I ask for filter coffee, I'm actually getting a blend of coffee and chicory.
Coffee and chicory.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. Blue Tokai has been built into quite an enviable brand. You have 25 stores, but you seem to be larger than life in wherever you're present. What have you done to make the brand so powerful?
I think we've really been focused on the product from the very beginning. Actually, when we first started, so our packaging is somewhat well known. It has your name on it. It has art on the back, and it was very labor intensive in the beginning. We were manually sticking those labels with people's names by hand, and I had a bit of a disagreement with my wife, who was my co-founder. I said, "This is way too expensive. We need to make the price. We need to bring the price down." But she was very focused from the beginning on having a good design aspect to it and a premium feel. And I think apart from having a really good product, the design and sort of the communication that we put forward has really helped us.
Okay. And I would imagine that is what is leading to a lot of repeat purchase.
Yeah. So actually, the majority of our customers are repeat. So we have a very luckily sort of a loyal following that supports us, and we're very fortunate in that respect.
And all of them go and brew the coffee in their homes.
Yeah, so not everybody. Lots of people come to the cafe and just take the coffee to go, and or sit and enjoy the coffee there. So in the beginning we faced some. We still to this day. Education is sort of a challenge for us. Nescafe and Brew have done an incredible job of marketing so that people now feel that that's the normal coffee, when actually it's a very sort of manufactured process to get coffee to be soluble. So we get people who will order our beans or order the powder actually, and call us up and say there's something wrong with this roast.
Okay.
I've tried hot water, I've tried cold water, but no matter what I do, it's not dissolving in water. So you guys have totally screwed up this roast. So they don't even understand that this requires some equipment and you have to brew it. So that's a challenge that we face, but it's also an opportunity.
Okay. So I've for the last 2 or 3 years been using a lot of Nespresso, and every time I'm in Singapore, I pick up all the pods, and I've often tried to debate with the people in the shop that you keep trying to convince me to buy intensity 6 and intensity 10, and I for the life of me can't figure out the difference. What does this mean?
So I think intensity, people associate quality of coffee with strength, and strength gets equated to bitterness. So actually you can take any sort of coffee and just increase the amount of powder that you're using relative to the amount of water, and that will increase the strength. But people, because typically they're adding a lot of milk and sugar, they want a strong coffee that they can cut with milk and sugar. So intensity, then you sort of decide how much bitterness you want in your cup, and then that translates into intensity.
So what is the right way to drink coffee? With milk, with sugar, black?
So there's no right way. It's whichever way you as an individual prefer. Milk has been paired with coffee for hundreds of years, so that's a natural combination that people really enjoy. Personally, I like to drink coffee, light roasted coffee that's black. When coffee is roasted light, it becomes more complex. You can taste more of the flavors in the bean, but it also has a sourness that can be off-putting to people.
Because I also, after I started Nespresso, I only drink black coffee. The moment I add something to it, I don't get the flavor.
So I think people, so sugar also is added very frequently to coffee, but that's because that coffee is bitter. So it's sort of a vicious cycle in a way. The coffee is roasted bitter, so then you have to add sugar to it, but then now you're sort of ruining the flavor of it. Whereas if you just have light roasted coffee, then it's not bitter and you don't need to add sugar.
Amazing. And what about all these very high-end coffees that you're getting out of elephants and out of the civet cats?
So
is it just a fad?
So the idea behind the civet cat coffee makes sense. So the ripeness of the coffee cherry determines the flavor that it will have. So you want to pick the coffee at sort of this optimum point of ripeness to maximize the flavor of that coffee. So the civet cats are naturally attuned to this process, and so they select only the ripest cherries. So by assumption, whatever passes through them would have been naturally selected to be the best cherries. Then that sort of took off, and now what happened is they put the civet cats into cages, and then they force feed all kinds of coffee to them, so it becomes a marketing gimmick.
Amazing. And you don't have any
So we don't. So
animal lovers complaining about that now.
No, we don't. We don't have any of those kind of coffees. That's not. That's not.
But I thought I'd ask because such a fascinating thing. So often I read something that civet cat coffee was sold for some crazy amount of money.
Yeah.
And I wondered, can people actually tell the difference?
So the natural process, it'd be quite rare to find this coffee. So that's why the price is so high.
Okay.
Now it's been human intervention has come in and sort of made it a little bit.
Amazing. So let me change gears a little bit and move into your life as an entrepreneur.
Sure.
You said you've been in India for 9 years. When did you start Blue Tokai?
We started doing the initial legwork in 2012, visiting the farm, sourcing the equipment.
So you've been in startup mode for about 6-7 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, what are some of the challenges startup entrepreneurs face?
So everything in the beginning is quite difficult.
Yeah.
So I would say, especially in India, there's huge opportunity. So for us, when we started, we were one of a handful of coffee companies in the specialty space.
Yeah.
But sort of the day-to-day challenges are much greater. So simple things like opening up a bank account, sourcing cardboard for packaging, finding staff in the beginning. These are sort of the day-to-day things that you don't expect will be so difficult, but actually take up a lot of your time. So that was sort of some of the initial challenges we faced were on sort of day-to-day small-scale tasks. Now, as we've grown and gotten bigger, new challenges have come. So as in the coffee industry in India, we're lagging a bit far behind sort of other places where coffee consumption is much higher and coffee industry has been more established. So we require a lot of baristas to serve coffee in our cafes, but the level of skill in the barista community is still quite low. So for us to produce and brew the coffee the way that we would like to brew it requires a lot of upskilling of people. But that's also an opportunity. Once you upskill people, then they're able to get better jobs, have more skills, get better salaries, live a better life.
Interesting. And do you think you're going to start bringing in coffees from other countries as well?
Well, not for the moment. There's a very high import duty on coffee. It's 110%.
Oh, really? Okay.
So the price point that we'd have to sell a coffee at is almost triple. And we started because we wanted to highlight good quality Indian farms. So our motto and our sourcing and our brand is very much associated with high quality Indian estates.
So staying with startups, this country is really, really promoting and pushing startups because that's the way I think our country wants to go. And yet, I'm sure you know a lot of startup entrepreneurs. 9 out of 10 startups don't make it.
Right.
And we've often seen there is a huge challenge of depression. The CCD person took the extreme step.
Yeah.
How important do you think is it for startups to be taught the meaning of failure?
I think it's important. It's obviously even startups that succeed, there are many failures along the way. Correct. So I think understanding failure is a necessary step along the process. Not to sort of personalize it, but maybe internalize it so that it gives you some extra drive and motivation, and also take some lessons from it. So if any failure is an opportunity to learn something, and so I think it's important that people look at it that way rather than sort of have it affect their ego and make them feel depressed and bad about themselves.
That is true. As far as entrepreneurs are concerned, you also mentioned that you opened 25 stores and all company-owned stores.
Right.
Now, that is serious money going into real estate, store renovation, equipment, etc. What do you think are some of the challenges of raising money for an entrepreneur?
So I think it's important that you're optimistic, but also genuine. Sort of presenting yourself as someone that you're not in order to raise money, or presenting plans that are unrealistic to achieve a higher valuation or to get more funds is only going to come back and hurt you in the end, because you're responsible for executing on that. So whatever you commit in terms of your fundraise, then you have to deliver on that plan. So I think it's very important that, yes, you have to present a positive picture of your business in order to get people interested, but that really needs to be grounded in reality and grounded to you as a person.
Interesting. And plans for Blue Tokai from 25 stores, 5 cities, nationwide, maybe to the US, or not yet?
Yeah, so we're actually in the process of fundraising very shortly to work on our next round of expansion. So we would like to take the store count to around 100. So right now we're present in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Jaipur, and Goa. Hyderabad, Chennai, Kolkata, Ahmedabad are some cities that we would like to open up. We're not looking to open up 1,000 stores across the country. I think for us, the stores are important to educate consumers about what's different about our coffee. They serve as sort of a brand experience where the baristas can explain how to brew the coffee at home, select the right coffee that suits your taste palette. And then ultimately, we're trying to get people to buy the coffee, because at the core, we're a coffee company, not a cafe company.
Correct. Very interesting. So let me now move to the next segment, which is questions about Matt personally.
Sure.
When was the last time you did something for the first time?
So for a long time, I've been interested in coding. But I haven't had time to sort of devote to that until very recently. I sort of decided I can't put this off any longer, and so I signed up for one of these online classes. And so started learning SQL so I could start doing some database analysis.
Wow, that's fascinating. And you're in a business which is difficult, people intensive, B2C, where customers are directly consuming your product. 25 stores built very quickly, 5 cities. I know what the challenges are, because when I was building Guardian, it was huge. What is the secret of your success?
I mean, I think it's premature to say that we're a success. We're along, we're moving along in our journey, and the response is encouraging. I think really focusing on the product and the experience is something that we've had from day one. I think there's lots of businesses. So I'm a consumer also, and interacting with most businesses is a painful experience. And I think just focusing on customer service is an easy sort of opportunity to really engender customer loyalty and to help your brand. And that's something that has been very important to us from day one. And then also really focusing on our coffee. So apart from the growing of it, we've made sure that the entire supply chain is in our control. So that has enabled us to really make sure from the farmer to the consumer that we can ensure the quality of that coffee.
Very interesting. And question I ask all my guests is, do you have any learnings from any failures?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of failures along the way. Quite recently, we decided to do a rather large marketing activation, and it ended up flooding our production team with orders that we were not equipped to handle. The customer service team was sort of overwhelmed, and actually it ended up being that there was almost no return on that investment. Very few of those people actually ended up converting, and it was as a company that doesn't spend a lot on marketing, this was sort of a blow to us, because we had finally decided to sort of take the plunge and do some marketing spends, and it backfired, and it ended up being a large amount of money lost. In retrospect, and shortly after that experience happened, we were able to design a new production system because we were faced with such a large amount of orders. It was very easy to see where the gaps were, and we also designed some technology layer to go on top of that. So it ended up having, in terms of a marketing aspect, it was not worthwhile in terms of helping us advance our production to the next level. We wouldn't have been able to do it without that. So sort of seeing the glasses half full side of what happened, and we were able to get something positive out of this.
So, yesterday we had a person who was in robotics.
Okay.
Do you think you could have robots as baristas?
I think in the future that will happen.
You think it'll happen?
I think in the future that will happen. There are already in Australia, in the US, there are cafes that are totally run by robots. Ultimately, it is a very mechanical process.
Correct.
A certain amount of coffee has to be ground to a certain level, and it goes into a machine with a certain amount of pressure applied to it. So that can all be automated, and I think that will ultimately free up baristas to become more customer-facing, which is something a robot can't do. So if the coffee making is automated, then their time is freed up to engage with people and to give a richer
because
experience.
it is a very mechanical process.
Yeah.
And there's no room for, let me use some innovation.
Yeah. There is. I mean, so in terms of brewing, there is innovation, but ultimately, whatever innovation can then be applied to the robots, and I think definitely that's where the future will go.
Okay. So, Matt, my last two questions to you. As a startup entrepreneur, do you have any advice to give to the thousands of people who will watch the show and who want to become startup entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So I got into this. We started Blue Tokai because we wanted to have a good cup of coffee for ourselves, my wife and I. Mm-hmm. And so we had this vision that we were going to be spending all this time visiting coffee estates, roasting all this coffee, drinking all this great coffee all the time. Our whole life will revolve around coffee. Mm-hmm. And so that is true to some extent, but actually 90% of our time goes into running a business. So I think it's important to choose something that you have an interest in and you're passionate about, but also understand that you really need to focus on the day-to-day aspects of having a business in order for your startup to be successful.
So I'm going to end our chat today with something you just commented in your last question. What is a good cup of coffee?
What is a good cup of coffee? So a good cup of coffee is whatever you as an individual prefer. So what you may like could be totally different than what I like, but that doesn't mean that my coffee is better than your coffee. So to me, a good cup of coffee, objectively, is one.
Is it the aroma?
Is one so that has been sourced from a farm that produces very high quality beans, and there's actually an objective scoring system. So anything above 80 points is considered specialty grade. Mm-hmm. And so in order to achieve that, it needs to have complexity of flavor. So fruity notes, nutty notes, chocolatey notes. It needs to have sweetness, and it needs to have balance. So if coffee ticks all of these boxes and has complexity, then that's going to be a good cup of coffee.
Amazing. I could almost be discussing this with someone who is an expert in malt whiskey. Yeah.
So actually, coffee is often compared to wine. And so wine has around 200 flavor and aroma components, and coffee has more than 1,000.
Wow.
So the potential for complexity in coffee is so much greater, and it's really a fascinating beverage.
Matt, thank you so much for coming to The Brand Called You.
Thank you.
Wish you lots of success with your fundraising and for your next 100 stores.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You podcast. Be sure to visit tbcy.in to join the conversation, access show notes, and discover fantastic bonus content. You can follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Simply search for The Brand Called You. Thank you and see you next week.